it. Now, I've had some colorful things to say about movies I either didn't care for or I just thought weren't all that great. I've said, this is boring, this is filler. It's not bad, but it's not good. I've said, I only need one thing from this movie, and it gave it to me. Don't expect much, from anything else. This movie did everything wrong, but it did one thing right, and that one right thing saved the movie. I've said, why is this here? For what reason are we even watching this? Who greenlit this? I've said things like that. It has been a very long time since I have come out and just said, this was bad. I saw Madam Web last night. Happy Valentine's Day. That was bad. My one saving grace is that I have AMC A-list, so I didn't actually pay for a ticket. So this movie is directed by S.J. Clarkson. Her previous movie that she directed was a movie called Toast, with Helena Bonham Carter and Freddie Highmore. Before that, she's directed, different episodes of different television shows, a couple of Marvel shows, if I'm not mistaken. Stars Dakota Johnson, Sydney Sweeney, Celeste O'Connor, Isabella Merced, Tahar Rahim, Mike Epps is in this, Emma Roberts, Adam Scott. So a nice little mini loaded cast in a very crappy movie. I'm gonna try to keep the synopsis short. So this is about Cassie Webb. Cassie Webb is a paramedic, former foster kid. She's a little awkward, a little quirky. She has issues with, relating to people, forming attachments, family, understandably so because her mother died in childbirth in the middle of the Amazon in Peru, but she didn't really know that part. We come to find out that out later. And she has this near-death experience where she basically codes, she dies, she's brought back to life via CPR, and she now has this newfound gift where she can see the future. And part of seeing the future connects her to these three girls who are completely unrelated to one another, but in different parts in the beginning, she comes into contact with all three of them. And this guy named Ezekiel, played by Tahar Rahim, is trying to kill them because he keeps having dreams about these three faces who are going to murder him. So he feels like, hey, I need to destroy them before they destroy me. So while he's out searching for these girls using what looks like the same technology that Lucius Fox used in The Dark Knight, but smaller, he finds them on a train, and Cassie saves their lives, and now she's working overtime to keep these three teenagers alive. That's pretty much the movie. Now, before I get into everything that made this movie bad, which is almost everything, we'll talk about what this movie did right, and that was the cinematography. I love the way this movie was shot. I thought it was just gorgeous, which makes sense because our DP is Mauro Fiore, an Italian-American cinematographer. He has worked many times with Antoine Fuqua, so Tears of the Sun, Training Day, Southpaw, The Equalizer, The Magnificent Seven. He's worked with James Cameron, Michael Bay, Avatar. He was the cinematographer for Avatar. So this is an award winner, someone who's worked on multiple Academy Award winning projects. I don't think there's really much else to say. The film is just beautifully shot. Just the framing choices, the way to pop certain colors, and not just to give us the setting or even a bit of foreshadowing as to who she's about to become, but also to kind of frame her clothing. Her colors are red and black. I've always known Spider-Man to be red and blue, but Madam Web's colors seem to be red and black. I'm not very familiar with the comic books. Please don't come for me. And it was interesting in the different shots because so much of her clothing is that red and black. She often has on a red jacket and a black shirt, but they chose to use those colors almost to frame her within certain shots. Very clever. I thought that was beautifully done. But that's where it ends a bit. And this is where I have 1,001 questions, because why are these guys bad? Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless. These are the same guys who wrote Dracula Untold, The Last Witch Hunter, Gods of Egypt, Morbius, Power Rangers. Who hired them? Why are they here? Why are they here? I have seen a lot of people compare this movie to Morbius and how bad it is. I think that is a fair comparison. I'm not exactly sure if I agree though. Not because I didn't think this movie was as bad as Morbius, it's just a different kind of bad. So I'd love to see where people are coming from, why they thought Morbius was so bad and how this compares. Because for me, Morbius was bad because the pacing was awful, and that goes back to the writing. The writing, there was too much. There was way too much, too many pieces in that puzzle. And instead of cutting some of that unnecessary junk out of the movie, they just zipped through everything really, really fast. It's like we're on a time crunch and we have to make sure we get all of this in there. And I understand the struggle with that because I've been writing for a very long time. I've been writing my entire life. And one of the most arduous processes of writing is the editing process, deciding what's necessary and what's not, because the entire project is your baby and you don't want to cut anything out. But it's almost like they weren't disciplined enough to cut things out. I did see a bit of the same problem in Madam Web. There was so much unnecessary that just needed to be cut out. And that's not just an issue with writing, but also with editing. There were scenes that went on way too long. So after, Cassie Webb rescues them from the bad guy, Ezekiel, in the train, and they end up hijacking a cab. Hijacking is a bad word. Stealing a cab. Well, that's still a bad word, but it's more accurate. Stealing a cab. The three girls are sitting in the back of the cab, and that scene went on for way too long. It was just too straightforward in terms of the way the camera was situated. It was supposed to be a very intense, high pressure situation. These four strangers, all meeting and being in the same place, experiencing this traumatic event together. It should have been much more boom, 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 boom. Like, what's going on? Who's doing here? Very whippy, fast dialogue, a little bit of funny, but it was so stale and so boring. It felt like a car scene in an old Seinfeld sitcom. You know what I mean? Just, you could tell it was a backdrop. At one point, I'm like, where are they even going? They've been going straight for a very long time. The scene just went on too long. There was another scene where she was teaching the girls CPR, which just kind of seemed weird, but it made sense. They brought it back in the end. That scene went on for too long and it was way too quiet. Like, they could have just made that kind of montagey and just put it some music and made it look, almost adorable with these girls trying to learn CPR. But writing and direction is where this movie failed, ultimately. It was just a poorly written story, very convoluted, didn't make any sense. This movie feels like the prologue of a novel. It provides necessary background information for what's to come, but you don't have to read it. It's not gonna hurt you at all or make things make any less sense if you don't read it. This movie was incredibly pointless, but I understand this movie is to set up this Spider-Woman universe. It has to. Something has to come after this because this felt incomplete. It felt pointless because it just felt like a setup. This was a prologue. It felt like the pilot episode of a television series instead of a movie. Now, everybody has different opinions on the acting, and everybody has different opinions on Dakota Johnson. I like Dakota Johnson. I think she's a good actress. She is funny in an unintentional way. I think she's made for comedy, but I don't think she's quite found the right script. The problem with her, I think she's just too pretty. I think she's too pretty and people are not going to take her seriously in comedy. But I feel like she was made for like dry comedy. And a little bit of that comes out, but it felt like everybody was acting. Nobody really slipped into their characters. Nobody disappeared. Nobody transformed. Everyone was just acting. It felt like I was just watching people play dress up. But it wasn't that these were terrible actors. It felt like they were giving what they could with what they had, but you can tell they were getting very poor direction and they were working with a really bad script. We're talking about three teenage girls here who are all coming from different kinds of trauma. You have Sydney, I don't even remember their names, good God. Sydney Sweeney's character, who is living with her dad, stepmom, and little brother, and she feels very unwanted in her home. You have Isabella Merced's character, who is living on her own because her father was deported 6 months prior. And then you have Celeste O'Connor's character, who is basically living on her own because her parents are overseas doing things. She feels like she interrupted their lives and she rebels accordingly. So you have these three teenage girls dealing with trauma who are just a little too agreeable. And they say things that were just dumb. It's, at one point, they're like, because she scolds them and says, what you did was dumb. It was irresponsible. You guys are impulsive. She's acting like a mom, which we're going to talk about that later. But Then they come around and say, we're not going to do anything dumb. We're not going to make bad decisions. We're going to listen. We're not going to be impulsive. Have y'all never written teenagers before? Teenage girls? Really? And they did Sydney Sweeney so dirty in this movie, so dirty. Number one, she doesn't look young enough. I mean, I'm not saying that she looks old. She looks her age. She's like 25. She looks like a 25-year-old. She doesn't look like a teenager. Even with that ugly little wig on and that schoolgirl getup they had it on, it was very, I don't want to say sexualized, but it was just, there was something off about it, about her outfit. But her costume was awful, the wig was awful, and she doesn't look young enough to play what's supposed to be, a 16 or 17-year-old. She just doesn't. I understand she's on Euphoria, but she just doesn't look young enough to play that age. She looks her age. She looks 25. She's too mature, is what I'm trying to say. There are certain actresses who still have a very immature looking face. She does not. She looks like a mature woman. I don't think she's quite right for this role, but she's not a terrible actress. I think she did the best she could. And the unfortunate part is that these characters are just not fleshed out. They all have like one little personality and they work within the realm of that personality. There are no layers to these characters. We're not with them long enough to really get to know them, which is crazy because the movie is almost 2 hours. And that's the other thing, is the pacing. The pacing was so weird, but again, that goes back to the terrible writing, because you have parts where the movie seems to move really nice and then it slows down and then it moves really quick again, and we skip over necessary information, and then we get to one part where they dump something in on us that we probably should have learned like 20 minutes prior, and it just boom boom boom. It was just very convoluted. Again, there were 4 writers for this movie. This felt like, kids in a reluctant group project where they were all like, okay, that's your part, that's your part, that's your part, that's your part. You do your stuff on your own, and then we'll just bring it all together and present it like we all work together. But the teacher can totally tell they didn't work together. It's not cohesive. That's what I'm looking for. The script is not cohesive. You can almost tell that different people worked on different parts. And it makes me wonder, who is the skilled writer in this group? Because there are parts where the script worked, and there were parts where the script absolutely did not work. Just didn't. I didn't have too many issues with the editing until it got to the action scenes. These are some of the most boring action scenes I've ever seen. But the biggest issue with the editing is the villain, played by Tamar Rahim. I'm gonna pull him up because all of his lines were dubbed. All of his lines were dubbed. I don't know what the problem is. I don't know what was going on set or once they got the sound back, but you could tell that none of the sound was in camera. None of the sound was on set for whenever he was speaking. His dialogue was done later because the voice and his lips just did not match up. Power Rangers, oddly enough. Remember Rita Repulsa? That's kind of what that was. I've been saying this for a while. Hollywood doesn't know what to do with female characters anymore. I don't know where the disconnect happened, when it happened. I don't know if it's because they're misreading culture or they are trying to get a feel for what we as the audience likes or don't like. Like, are they spending too much time on TikTok that they've decided we're going to just defeminize women in general? And then when they try to refeminize women, it just doesn't quite work. But there's also, this movement within our culture that's trying to strip women from what's natural. But this movie, I don't know if it was intentional. I don't know if they meant to do it. But the one thing I did like about the movie, because Cassie is a woman who didn't grow up with a family. She's a foster kid. Her mother died in childbirth. That was the other thing. Sorry, tangent. Unnecessary information. All of a sudden she has to go back to Peru. That was just so dumb and just bold. It just didn't make any sense. It was just really, really stupid. Like, she could have just researched on the internet like they do in most movies. But she went back to the Amazon to, figure out her past and figure out what her mom was doing in the Amazon when she was researching spiders. Y'all remember the trailer. And we learned there that she was angry with her mom, that she'd always had this issue with her mom. We didn't know that. All of a sudden it's dumped on us that she had mommy issues. That would have been nice to know. It would have made all these other things that were happening within her character make a little more sense. Because at first we have this woman who's very standoffish, doesn't want to be dealing with people, doesn't seem to care about other people unless she's working. And all of a sudden she takes on this motherly role with these three teenagers who are all absent in one way or another of a mom. And it goes into it naturally. But I thought that was a beautiful thing to see because we live in this weird culture that seems to want to separate women from motherhood, and yet so beautifully and maybe unintentionally, this movie shows that for whether we want to or not, as women, we will slip into that mother role almost instinctually when the time calls for it. Without even missing a beat, she just naturally mothers these women, and it's an instinct. It's an instinct. Now, as for you parental units who are wondering, is this movie appropriate for my child? This is no better or worse in terms of what's appropriate for your kids than any other superhero movie that's out there. If they've seen Iron Man, they'll be okay. As far as bad language, the worst is the S word. There's no foul language in this. The clothing is a little questionable. I don't know why the clothing was just so sexualized. Like, that's something else to explore. But it's no better or worse than any other superhero movie that they've seen. For more info on what's appropriate for them, what's not, check out my review on Criticless. And that's all I got. I don't want to talk about it no more. Thank you so much for sticking around. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know whether to recommend it or not. If you're someone who's like, I need to have my own opinion, go see it on a Tuesday when it's like $5, or wait for it to come on streaming. But this was just really bad. And I'm ready to see something good. I need to see a good movie. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for listening, watching, sticking around. And I'll see you next time.